There is a paradox that has influenced the entire history of humanity. For 300,000 years, humans existed only to survive. But just 11,700 years ago, everything suddenly changed. Only a few thousand years later, agriculture emerged, and civilizations began to rise one after another. Was this simply an historical coincidence, or did the Holocene itself unlock the door to the birth of human civilization? To understand why civilization emerged only in the Holocene epoch, we must first transport ourselves to the end of the Pleistocene. We enter a world that was almost unrecognizable compared to the planet we live on today. Millions of square kilometers of North America, Northern Europe, and Northern Asia were buried under ice sheets several kilometers thick. To the south of the glaciers lay the Mammoth Steppe, a vast ecosystem of cold, dry grasslands stretching from Western Europe through Siberia to Alaska. This was the home of giant creatures, such as the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, and the ancient bison. There was the giant Irish elk, with antlers stretching nearly 4 meters wide, alongside many other megafauna species, the true rulers of the earth for tens of thousands of years. Notably, the Homo sapiens of that time were almost no different from us in terms of intelligence. They crafted exceptionally complex stone spearheads, stitched clothing from animal hides to protect themselves from the cold, and mastered fire. They coordinated strategic hunts and even created stunning works of art on cave walls, like those found in Le Moustier and Chauvet. Their brains were no less developed than those of modern humans. This raises a profound paradox. If humans were intelligent for so long, why did it take 300,000 years for civilization to appear? In certain periods, the temperature in the northern hemisphere could rise or fall by tens of degrees Celsius in just a few decades, fast enough to completely transform entire landscapes. Nature was constantly shifting, and everything living was forced to change with it. As a result, humans had little choice but to keep moving. Archaeological evidence suggests that most hunter-gatherer bands consisted of only a few dozen individuals. In such a world, building permanent homes, storing massive food supplies, or establishing land ownership made little practical sense. Even food resources were highly unpredictable. Wild fruits, seeds, and tubers appeared only in certain seasons, while the seasons themselves changed unpredictably. When every decision was focused on surviving for just another few days or weeks, people could not afford to plan for months or years ahead. This is why, for almost the first 300,000 years of Homo sapiens history, there were no cities, no large-scale agriculture, no writing, and no civilizations. However, after hundreds of thousands of years of upheaval, the Earth itself began to change. For the first time, the forces of nature stopped working against humanity. Instead, they gradually created conditions for an entirely new way of life. About 11,700 years ago, after the end of the last cold dry spell, the planet entered a new era known as the Holocene. Data collected from ice cores drilled over 3 kilometers deep in Greenland reveals a stark shift. For tens of thousands of years before this, temperatures swung wildly, soaring up and then plunging down, like the heartbeat of an unstable planet. But when the Holocene began, the climate curve became significantly more stable, enough for the rhythm of the seasons to repeat reliably year after year. This melting process released massive amounts of fresh water into the oceans, causing global sea levels to rise by more than 120 meters. Doggerland, the vast plain that once connected the British Isles to Europe, where archaeologists found animal bones and stone tools, sank beneath the North Sea. The ice bridge that once allowed humans and animals to migrate between Siberia and North America disappeared beneath the waters we know today. Further south, the continent of Sahul was split by rising seas, separating Australia and New Guinea into 2 distinct landmasses. It was during this period that the familiar map of our world began to take shape. But the most important change occurred not in the oceans, but on land. The Mammoth Steppe, the cold grassland ecosystem that once supported countless giant animals, began to shrink, and then vanished entirely. These giant animals required vast open pastures to find hundreds of kilograms of vegetation every day. As forests displaced the grasslands, their food sources vanished. To this day, scientists debate the exact roles played by climate change and human hunting in this mass extinction. The Earth changed first, as if the planet prepared the stage before humanity stepped onto it. For the first time, people could think about the future, rather than just trying to survive the next winter. Civilization did not arise from a single brilliant idea appearing in a sudden, singular moment. But the ecological void left behind by the Pleistocene gave rise to a completely new question. How would humanity respond when nature finally stabilized? As the Holocene climate gradually stabilized, a strange phenomenon began to manifest all over the Earth. Roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, human communities living thousands of kilometers apart, separated by mountains, deserts, and oceans, made almost the exact same decision. They began cultivating crops instead of relying solely on hunting and gathering. Why did people who had never met begin to change in the exact same direction? In the Fertile Crescent of Western Asia, people began domesticating wheat, emmer, and barley about 11,000 years ago. In the Yangtze River Basin, the first rice paddies slowly began to form. In the Yellow River Basin, millet became the primary source of food, as it was well adapted to the drier northern climate. In the highlands of New Guinea, indigenous peoples domesticated bananas and taro. In Central America, maize was bred from a wild mountain grass known as teosinte. In the Andes, the potato became the foundation of mountain community life. In many parts of Africa, sorghum and pearl millet were also selected over generations. What is especially remarkable is that these communities knew virtually nothing of each other's existence. If knowledge did not spread, what forced them to change simultaneously? In reality, hunter-gatherers possessed a deep understanding of the plant world long before the advent of agriculture. The ancestor of modern corn was teosinte, a wild grass with only a few tiny grains enclosed in a hard, woody casing. After millennia of human selection, larger ears of corn gradually emerged, containing hundreds of softer kernels, to the point where they could no longer disperse their seeds naturally without human intervention. Wheat underwent a similar process when it lost its ability to naturally shatter and drop its seeds, making it more suitable for harvest. This shows that agriculture was not an invention that appeared in a single day, but was the result of thousands of years during which humans quietly guided plant evolution. But what is even more surprising is that humans changed the crops, and those crops in turn began to change humans. When food could be produced in the same place, the necessity for constant migration disappeared, making permanent settlement the better option. For the first time in history, humans stopped merely searching for food. They forced food to grow where they lived. But to turn fields into complex communities, humans needed another crucial element, an event that would no less radically change the course of history. At that very moment, another quiet revolution began. Humans stopped simply living among animals. They began living with them and depending on them. Research in archaeology, genetics, and evolutionary biology shows that this was a process of co-evolution. Humans selected the most docile, easily trained, and useful individuals. The earliest companion to emerge, long ago, was the dog. DNA analysis and archaeological evidence suggest that dogs were domesticated from gray wolves at least 15,000 years ago, and possibly even earlier. Humans previously depended entirely on unpredictable hunting. An even greater turning point was the emergence of draft power from livestock. Agricultural land expanded, food production soared, and the population began to grow at an unprecedented rate. For the first time in history, the muscle power of humans was supplemented by the strength of another species. This was a breakthrough no less important than the invention of agriculture itself. Around 5,500 years ago, across the Eurasian plains, another revolution occurred, the domestication of horses. At first, they were bred for meat and milk, but soon people realized that the chief value of horses lay not in food, but in speed. Journeys that previously took weeks could now be completed in a single day. Trade expanded, information began to travel faster, and later, the tactics of warfare were completely transformed. But every alliance comes with a price. As humans and livestock lived closer together in increasingly crowded villages, pathogens also found opportunities. They crossed the species barriers. Many studies in genetics and pathology suggest that some of the major human infectious diseases originated from domesticated animals. Looking back, it is hard to say who changed whom more. This silent alliance did not just help humans survive, it also led to a steady accumulation of wealth. And when wealth began to accumulate, history entered an entirely new chapter. For hundreds of thousands of years, while humans lived by hunting and gathering, they existed by one simple rule. Whatever they found today, they consumed today. There were no long-term reserves, no accumulated wealth, no secure tomorrow. There was simply nothing to invest in the future. But when agriculture joined with the climate stability of the Holocene, a non-linear leap occurred. Food production began to exceed immediate survival needs. For the first time in evolutionary history, humans created something they did not need to eat right away to survive: surpluses that could be preserved. From this point, civilization began, because food surpluses were not just food, they were social fuel. When a community could produce more food than it needed, a portion of the population was freed from working in the fields. They no longer had to hunt or plant every day. From this moment, entirely new roles emerged. Toolmakers, potters, the first architects, priests, warriors, and social organizers. But as soon as people began storing food, a new problem arose. Who would control it? In Jericho, one of the oldest settlements in the world, about 10,000 years ago, people built massive stone walls and a watchtower. They built them not only to defend against enemies, but also to guard their food supplies. In Çatalhöyük in Turkey, thousands of people lived closely packed in interconnected houses, with granaries located directly inside their living quarters. In Mehrgarh, Pakistan, clay granaries for wheat and barley appeared about 9,000 years ago. These structures reveal an important truth. The first civilization was built not around palaces, but around food warehouses. Those who controlled the food could decide who ate, who had to work, who held land rights, and who was excluded from the system. From here, concepts that today seem obvious began to take shape: property, accumulation of wealth, and social inequality. But when they began storing thousands of bags of grain, a new limit of human capability emerged: memory. And under the pressure of administrative necessity, one of the most important inventions in history was born. About 8,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, people began using small clay tokens of different shapes to represent commodities. Out of the need to keep records of food, writing was born. Food surpluses did not just feed more people, they gave birth to time, professions, property, power, and rules. And this necessity would pave the way for a new leap, where memory belonged not to an individual, but to an entire civilization. In hunter-gatherer communities, trust was built through familiar faces, voices, and direct memory. But in Uruk, where archaeologists estimate between 40,000 and 50,000 people could have lived around 3200 BC, most people never met each other. They did not know who belonged to the same tribe, who was cheating, who controlled the granaries, or who gave orders. That was when another invention appeared. It was not carved in clay, nor built of brick, but it was more powerful than any monument: systematized trust. In Mesopotamia, early administrative texts did not just describe grain or labor, but gradually formed stable rules regarding ownership, exchange, and responsibility. When a clay tablet stated that Kushim received 29,086 measures of barley, the question was no longer about the number itself, but that the entire community had to agree the number was real. And when this agreement expanded to tens of thousands of people, it became the first foundation of law. Archaeological finds in cities like Uruk and later Ur show that along with writing, standardized systems of measurement also emerged. A unit of labor had to have a fixed value. What may seem technical was actually a psychological revolution. Humans began to trust abstract concepts more than their own direct experience. And this was a leap that no other animal species before them had ever made. Those who controlled writing, first scribes and then temples and palaces, became the coordination centers of society. In ancient Egypt, tax records along the Nile not only recorded agricultural production, but also determined who was exempt from taxation and who had to pay more. In the Indus Valley, trade seals indicate the existence of a strictly controlled system of commodity trade, though we have not yet fully deciphered their language. In ancient China, oracle bones were initially used not only for record keeping, but also to legitimize political decisions through divine providence. The crucial detail was this: writing made society manageable on massive scales. From this point on, decisions were made based on documents that could be stored, copied, referred to, and compared. Laws became more stable, taxation more precise, and large-scale projects such as irrigation canals, city walls, or temples could be carried out over several generations consecutively without interruption upon the death of any single individual. The most striking example is the canal systems in Mesopotamia and Egypt, where water management could not depend on the memory of individual farmers, but required precise data about water levels, flood times, and labor distribution. But the most important consequence was not technical. It was a philosophical shift. For the first time, humans lived in a world where truth no longer depended on the memory of living people. Anthropological studies show that in small communities, trust can be maintained through direct interaction. But once a society crosses the threshold of several thousand to tens of thousands of people, belief systems begin to diverge. In the civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Yellow River Valley, we see a repeating pattern. Early religious and symbolic systems initially served to unify society, but over time they became increasingly complex and specialized. Temples were not only places of worship, but also economic centers where products were stored, labor was distributed, and power was legitimized. For example, in Uruk and Sumerian city-states, cuneiform texts show that temples owned a major portion of the land and coordinated agricultural production. This meant that the boundary between spiritual ideas and material mechanisms almost disappeared. However, this merging gave rise to an even stronger effect. Ideas began to take on organization. Instead of existing only in rituals or oral tradition, they were standardized into laws, doctrines, and systems of power. A classic example is the rise of empires, such as Assyria and later Persia under the Achaemenid dynasty, where administrative systems, law, and religious beliefs were used in parallel to govern territories stretching across thousands of kilometers. Historical research shows that many major conflicts in the ancient world were linked not only to the struggle for resources, but also to differences in belief systems, the way each civilization explained the world and its place in it. From this point on, ideas ceased to be something standing above society. They became part of the very structure of society. They spread like a cultural organism, competing, changing, and adapting to the political, economic, and military environment. Ideas that helped society function more efficiently spread, while those that no longer corresponded to reality were discarded or transformed. And in the course of this process, something unprecedented in the history of evolution occurred. Humans no longer lived only in the physical world created by nature, but also in a second layer of the world, composed entirely of shared beliefs, symbols, and ideas. This layer could not be touched, yet it could destroy cities, build empires, or change the course of history. As the boundary between idea and reality became increasingly blurred, humanity entered a new phase, where power lay not only in understanding the physical world, but also in the ability to expand and control the very systems of ideas operating within it, and even more so after the Industrial Revolution. Signs that the system was being affected from within began to manifest in the atmosphere. In parallel with this, stratigraphy, the science that studies the Earth's memory, began to detect anomalies that are difficult to explain by natural causes. Sedimentary layers on different continents contain traces of charcoal from massive forest fires. A sharp reduction in the amount of wild plant pollen, replaced by the pollen of cultivated crops, and the appearance of artificial agricultural soils, which geologists call anthrosols. In many regions of Europe, China, and the Middle East, these changes began approximately 8,000 to 5,000 years ago. This coincided with the development of agriculture and systems of long-term settlement. A prime example is the Fertile Crescent, where the first irrigation systems of Mesopotamia appeared. They not only supported the existence of cities such as Uruk and Babylon, but also permanently altered the soil structure. Water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was directed through a network of artificial canals. As a result of evaporation, mineral salts accumulated in the soil, In ancient Europe and East Asia, a sharp decrease in tree pollen is observed in lake sediment layers, which is replaced by an increase in agricultural crops and artificial pastures. By the time empires such as the Roman, Han in China, and the civilizations of the Americas arose, this footprint had spread even wider. The most obvious turning point came when modern science was able to view the Earth as a system of data. Ice cores bear witness to an unprecedented rise in the concentration of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide and methane. This goes far beyond the natural fluctuations observed over the previous hundreds of thousands of years. But the most thought-provoking aspect is not that humans changed the Earth, but the speed of these changes. What will happen when the planet itself begins to respond to these changes? In a system where the entire equilibrium is pushed to the limit, the Holocene, in the seemingly calm course of human history, was actually not a stable epoch in an absolute sense, but rather a narrow range of fluctuations between the immense upheavals that the Earth was experiencing. Even in the most peaceful epochs, the Earth never truly stood still. It simply oscillated less, and this was enough for people to begin growing crops, settling down, and creating complex societies. Climate data obtained from ice cores shows that the temperature in the North Atlantic dropped sharply over a short period in geological scale, in just 160 to 200 years. The cause was a massive amount of fresh water from the glacial Lake Agassiz in North America, which poured into the ocean, disrupting the global circulation of heat. In the Middle East, where the first farming communities were forming, archaeological traces show that some settlements shrank or relocated. This reflected the sudden environmental pressure on the survival systems of early humans. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire, one of humanity's first centralized political systems, collapsed during this period. In the Indus River Valley, cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro gradually declined and were abandoned. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom plunged into a deep political and social crisis. Importantly, these upheavals did not destroy civilizations overnight, but exposed the weaknesses accumulated in social systems, water resource management, food distribution, and the adaptive capacity of political institutions. Thus, in the long term, the Holocene was not a peaceful straight line. It was a narrow corridor of relative stability, where natural fluctuations remained low enough for humans to survive and develop. And it is at the intersection of relative stability and accumulated disturbances that a larger question begins to emerge. Not about whether the Holocene was stable, but about what will happen when this stability goes beyond the limits that nurtured all of human history. Civilization was not born in perfect conditions, but in the process of ongoing adaptation between humans and a planet that is constantly changing, the Holocene was never absolutely motionless. Now, we are moving in the opposite direction and becoming a geological force capable of changing the face of the planet. The end of this stable period is a reminder that any equilibrium is temporary. When the single climate structure that nurtured civilization begins to break down, the ultimate question arises. Will humanity have the wisdom to survive on a changed Earth? Thanks for staying with WUFO Space until the very end of this journey through the boundless universe. If you found this video interesting and informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WUFO Space so you don't miss our next cosmic adventures. Your support means a lot to us and fuels our passion to continue exploring the wonders beyond.